In this training module, I'm going to show you the provisional patent application that I use for the workshop and for my own patent applications when I draft them. Now, this one actually has a header and a footer on it, so it's a little bit different than what I use, but it's got all the same sections. I actually start with the same template language or, updates of that language, and I follow the same steps that I'm showing you now. You'll see that it's in the order of the sections that are required for a patent application based on the rules that the Patent Office specifies, but we'll go in and we'll probably delete some of those as we go through the patent application drafting process. So let's look at this template now and get a quick introduction to what the different parts are and what it looks like. When you draft your own application, you can either draft your application in this same template, or you could take and you could put your application in a blank document. That's what I would normally do, so it doesn't have the header and footer, and I might provide that to you also in that form. But I want you to have this version so you get all of the instructions that come with it, all the references, tools, and resources, so that you know what to go out and use when you're drafting and working on a certain section of your provisional patent application. So the first page really just shows, like we talked about, there's some different laws that apply to drafting your provisional patent application. Sections 111, 112A, and 113. That you'll see goes through the same things we've talked about in prior modules. Then there's some instructions about the template itself. I've used 3 different types of text. Red text is really just instructions. If you decide that you want to draft in this template itself, when you're done, you'll want to go through and you'll want to delete the red text. You'll of course want to delete the blue and gold text too, but you want to delete the red text that's just instructions. Blue text is sample language. It's something that I've written before, either as part of an actual application or as a sample for this workshop. But it's the type of language that I would use, and it's meant to give you a head start so you don't have to come up with all of the same things. You can start to fill in the blanks a little bit before you can fill out more of the details of your invention in the application. Lastly, gold text is text that simply refers to some of the tools and resources that I'm providing as part of the workshop. If you want to refer to those, watch the videos that go with it, or look at the outlines or the different frameworks or tools that come with that section, you can do that. This is just a reminder that those come. Again, you'll want to delete that text from this if you're going to use this as your template and work directly in this document. Otherwise, just start a new document and copy over the essential parts that you want in that blank document. We've also got a little bit of reference here as to how to file, and we're going to go through some training modules on that in Module 5. And then we've got some references here to the ProApp Success Plan that I'll introduce you to later. That's really what you can do after you file your provisional patent application to determine whether or not you have an invention and a business model that justify moving forward with the more expensive and more complex parts of the non-provisional patent application process. So let's move down now to the meat of the application. You'll see that this is in the order that the Patent Office suggests that you put it, and I would continue to use that order. In the sample that we're going to look at later, you'll see that I've actually kept this same order. I've drafted right in this document, and I've just changed some of the language, and you'll see how I've done mine. I've tried to keep it clear so that you can see what I've changed, what I've left the same, where I've added, and those types of things. So here we have the title of the invention. You've got a sample there, power management unit for a computer processor. We list out who the inventors are. This is one section that's not required in the rules, necessarily in the specification itself, but just out of convenience, we often will list who the inventors are in the specification for a provisional patent application. Part of that is because it's easier when we give that to a client that they can look at it and they can see immediately who the inventors are without having to go back and reference a separate document. When we file, though, you'll see that it has to go into a separate document called the cover sheet and be listed in more detail there. But we list it here for convenience so everyone knows who the inventors are or who we have been told or believe the inventors are on the application. Here, if you're the only inventor, just list yourself. If you've got co-inventors, people who've helped you with the invention, you can list them too. And again, we're going to go over who inventors would be in a separate inventorship module. The next section is a cross-reference to related applications. If you remember from one of the prior training modules, I said that I usually will omit this. I'll just delete this section out because it doesn't apply for a couple reasons. But it might in some cases, so I leave it in my template, but usually I'll just omit it. And you'll see in the red instructions for each of these, I usually will say this is optional or this is required, and then I would give my recommendation. It's recommended to include this section if other related patent applications exist, so that separate documentation is not required to track those related applications. Again, if this is your first application, you won't have any others. You don't want to reference somebody else's patents or patent applications in this section. It would only be a reference to your own patent or patent application. So if you don't have any of those, just omit this whole section. The next one is whether or not you have federally sponsored research. If you're not accepting grant money and developing technology based on that grant money from the federal government, then you should just exclude this section also. The next section is sequence listings. Sequence listings refer to DNA or amino acid or nucleotide type of sequences. It's not my field of technology. If you're into the genetics field, you might have an application where you need to do this. We can get you some samples if you do run into that and need to find out how somebody would normally do that type of sequence listing. And here what you do is you explain what the sequence listing is and reference an attachment of some sort. For the background, we're going to put in a little bit about what the technology is that's already out there. We're going to focus more so, though, on the problems of what the technology is that exists and the lack of solutions for those problems, and we'll talk about how to do that later. Next is the summary. I would normally exclude this section because it's extra work that doesn't really give you any benefit at the provisional stage, but this is really just a summary of what your invention is or what the different versions of your invention might be. Next is the brief description of the drawings. This is just a listing, basically one sentence per drawing, very concise, that says what each drawing is about and just basically gives you an introduction to what the drawings are. What I'll typically do when I get to this point, and you'll see this in my own sample applications, is I will take my brief description of the drawings after I've drafted it. I'll copy that down into the detailed description section, and I'll use that as a starting outline for my detailed description. I'll show you how that works later, but I just wanted to give you a heads up here. Following the brief description is the detailed description section. We're going to spend a lot more time on this section. This is probably going to be what takes the longest for you to draft in your own provisional patent application. With that said, though, I wouldn't expect you to spend more than maybe 2 hours on your detailed description. I guess you could spend 3 or 4, but I don't want you to go overboard here and let the drafting of this long specification keep you from actually getting your invention patent pending. What you want to do is you want to put enough information in here so you can teach somebody else how to make and use your invention. That's it. I know that it's kind of ambiguous perhaps, but you don't have to do more than that. If you are talking with a friend of yours who knows the same type of technology, or perhaps if it's simple technology and you're talking to a spouse or a friend or a mother or father or even a child, depending on what the technology is, and you sat down and you said, hey, I've invented something and this is what I've invented and this is how it works, and you explain that to them in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, depending on how complex your invention is, and they understood how it works, they understood how you're making it, they understood how they would use it, that's sufficient. That's the threshold you need to meet. Now we're going to do a few more things on top of that, but you don't need to go overboard and try to put down every detail of every part of every piece that goes into your invention. You'll want to do that for the pieces that are critical, the pieces that make your invention new and novel and work in a better way than what other technology works that's already out there. But above and beyond that, you don't want to describe all of the conventional things that are already out there that you're just incorporating in a way that somebody would expect them to work if they were to run into those same things in other areas. Also at this point, I want to mention that there's a lot of language that we put in these patent applications, and I've tried to minimize it here so it's really just the most important parts. But there's language that we call boilerplate language. Basically language that we put into every patent application. We might not even change it at all because it's written pretty generically to say this is an invention or this is one version of an invention. There are lots of different versions and I'm going to describe them, but they might be used in different ways than what I describe. They might be recombined in different ways. They might achieve additional objectives other than the ones I described, or just give some kind of breadth or some leniency to what you're describing to let people know that that's not necessarily the strict and only version that they could implement that might infringe your invention. I've also put some samples of the description of a different system or apparatus as well as a method. And we're going to talk about what those are when we get into the detailed description module. So we're almost to the end here. This is a section on claims. This is where we're going to put a little bit of time in Module 4 into drafting a couple simple claims. They'll be very simple. We're not going to spend time trying to get them perfect because at this stage, they don't act like normal claims. Rather, they act like part of your description. They have some benefits we'll go over, but we're going to just look at a couple simplified ways of creating some claims where you say, my invention has these basic parts and works in this basic way. The last part of the specification is the abstract. This is another part where we're probably going to omit it because it doesn't really have any legal significance at this stage, and there isn't any real benefit to including it in a provisional patent application. So I would recommend that you omit that in your application and not bother with it. And then, although not part of the specifications, I put some language in here about the drawings, just a couple references and instructions here. We've already gone over that, so you probably don't need to review that here, but this is a reminder in case you wanted to remember what tools and resources you could reference as you do your drawings. So that's it. That's the template for the provisional patent application. You should now be able to reference this template as we go through the next upcoming modules and look at the different sections and the instructions there and see that they're very similar to what we're teaching in the modules themselves, and that we followed those same principles and teachings in the samples that we're going to review of the different sections.